It's my pleasure now to introduce our first afternoon keynote speaker, Mr. Christopher Painter. Chris is the coordinator for cyber issues for the U.S. State Department, where he coordinates and leads the United States diplomatic efforts to advance an open, interoperable, secure, and reliable internet and information infrastructure. He works closely with components across the department, other agencies, the White House, the private sector, and civil society to implement the President's international strategy for cyberspace, and ensures that U.S. foreign policy positions on cross-cutting cyber issues are fully synchronized. These issues include promoting norms of responsible state behavior and cyber stability, advancing cybersecurity, fighting cybercrime, promoting multi-stakeholder internet governance, and advancing internet freedom. I'd like to introduce Chris and hand over the podium to him.
Well, thank you, and it's a great pleasure to be here today. And I recall the very first one of these meetings back in 2011, and even with the snow, I think this has been a very good turnout today, and it's really a testament to both Georgetown and Catherine's leadership that we have it's progressed to this point. I think this has been one of the annual markers for real good discussions about these issues, and I think it gets richer every year, so that's great. I wanted to really build off some of the things you heard earlier today, some from Mike Daniel and others, and build off that and talk about the concept of what our office does and this concept of cyber diplomacy, which is more encompassing than just governments talking to governments in diplomatic channels, but really does bring in a lot of the other issues and a lot of the other structures and some progress we made. Last week, my office celebrated its 3rd anniversary, which seems surprising to me. It doesn't seem like it's been that long. And it was an important milestone, not just for us, but an important milestone because 3 years ago, when this office was set up by then Secretary Clinton and was something that then Deputy Secretary Steinberg thought about, it was really the first of its kind. It was the first office in a foreign ministry anywhere in the world that was dedicated to cyber diplomacy. And since then, there's been quite a lot of development. You heard from Heli Timar-Klar, one of the things you've seen is in even the European Union, which, as she pointed out, is not a member state, it's not a state, but a collection of states. They've really put a lot of effort in this issue, and they have a cross-EU cyber strategy that has various components throughout the EU, and I think that's significant. The State Department recognized really early on that this set of issues constituted a new foreign policy imperative. And as we reached out to other states and nations to join us in working toward an agenda of prosperity, security, and openness in the cyber realm, the concept of cyber diplomacy was at first so new that we just didn't have counterparts to talk to. And I think, this cannot be, people often look at this issue, and I think you see this when you go around the world and talk to folks, as a technical issue. And traditionally, a lot of the times, the people you would deal with in other governments would be the technical agencies. They would be sometimes the ministries of communication, or sometimes the ministries of justice or interior. And they all have important roles, but many of them didn't have the larger picture. They didn't have the picture of human rights. They didn't have the picture of larger international relations and how all of these things played. And that's significant. I think you really need to have that higher governmental view that includes the foreign policy dimension, but brings all those different parts together and really addresses this in a more holistic way. It's not, a lot of people think that this is an area where you need to be a technical expert. And that's getting better over time, where people now understand that the issues we're dealing with here are core issues of security policy, core issues of human rights policy, and core issues of economic policy. And that really is foreign policy. That is what the things that we and other countries do, and it's important we look at it through that lens. One indicator of how quickly cyber issues have shot to the forefront in the diplomatic agenda is how completely it's changed from just us being the only ones out there to many people being out there now. Now there are offices dedicated to cyber diplomacy in foreign ministries throughout the world, and new ones are cropping up, it seems, every couple of months. And that's a good thing, and that's something we want. Indeed, just about 2 months ago, China appointed someone as their coordinator for cyber diplomacy, and they've started their own bilateral schedule. And as I lead our U.S.-China cyber dialogue, which is an all-of-government dialogue and includes not just the State Department, but a lot of other agencies, our economic agencies, our security agencies, and our both uniformed and civilian military on both sides. It's important for those structures to be there and that attention to be paid in other governments. We're seeing these issues being discussed in virtually every international forum, and it's increasingly being seen, this idea of cyber diplomacy is essential to the conduct of greater foreign policy. It's not just a severable issue, it's something that is part and parcel of these larger policy agendas. A primary goal in the creation of the State Department's Office of the Coordinator for Cyber Issues was to advance the objectives that were laid out, as Catherine said, in the White House's International Strategy for Cyberspace that was issued in May 2011. The international strategy was the first of its kind in the world and articulated, very importantly, the U.S. vision for cyberspace as, and I quote, a place where norms of responsible, just, and peaceful conduct among states and people have begun to take hold, and commits to, quote, an international cyberspace policy that empowers the innovation that drives our economy and improves lives here and abroad, unquote. Most important, the international strategy reflects our conviction that if all nations and peoples of the world are to reap the tremendous political, economic, and social benefits that cyberspace offers, cyberspace must be open, interoperable, secure, and reliable. And this conviction is really the basis for all of our diplomatic efforts across the board in all the countries that we deal with and all the regional and larger organizations we deal with. Of course, it will come as no surprise to people who pay attention to these issues that not all states share this vision. Some states see an open internet as a threat to their stability, and they have sought to assert sovereign rights to inappropriately control content online. The events of the past year, as we just heard, have posed additional challenges. The unauthorized NSA disclosures have led some states to seek to challenge and change the global internet architecture that could lead to a fragmented splinternet or could impose state control over the multi-stakeholder system. Nonetheless, we think that the same fundamental cyber policy principles that were important before the disclosures remain important and vital now, and in fact, I think even more so. Our goal now, is when the international strategy was released, is to work with a large community of like-minded governments. And when I say like-minded, I don't mean just a small group of governments. I mean a big tent of like-minded governments that include, most importantly, the developing world and reaching out to the developing world and bringing them into the tent. And other stakeholders that supports the notion of an open, interoperable, secure, and reliable internet as the best way to reap the internet's economic and social benefits. The State Department is working to promote these principles in 6 areas. The first, and the one where I think there's been just tremendous progress over the past year, is in international security and cyberspace. We continue to work to develop a shared understanding about norms of acceptable state behavior in cyberspace, which will be talked about in the panel after I'm finished, which will help enhance stability, ground foreign and defense policies, guide international partnerships, and help prevent misunderstandings that lead to conflict. Even with the challenges of the last year, there have been significant accomplishments in this area. Most importantly, in 2013, the UN Group of Governmental Experts, a group of 15 countries that included, among others, the United States, led by my deputy, who will be in this next panel, Michelle Markov, as well as countries including Russia, China, and India, reached a landmark consensus that the same international legal principles, such as the UN Charter and the law of state responsibility, that have promoted predictability and stability between states during conflict in the kinetic space apply equally in cyberspace. Now that's a very significant finding because there were some states who believed that you needed a whole different legal structure, that the existing law, existing rules did not apply in cyberspace, you needed something very different. And that could be itself very destabilizing and cause huge problems. So this agreement that this existing law applies is really important. And the next step, obviously, is how it applies. And we will be seeking to build agreement on additional norms of responsible state behavior grounded in existing international law that apply to the spectrum of cyber activities that fall below the use of force threshold. In addition, at the next GG, we're going to build on the agreement that international law applies and trying to determine exactly how international law applies. Now, just one sentence, and Michael mentioned this morning, Michael Daniel mentioned this morning, some of those peacetime norms that we could think about include what the president recently said in a speech, that cyber-enabled theft for commercial gain should not be permitted. And that's a norm that we can try to promote in a number of different forms around the world. Perhaps interference with financial systems or with critical infrastructures. These are the kinds of things that are worth exploring, seeing how they're grounded in international law, and then taking forward in the international community. The U.S. has also led international efforts to establish practical cyber risk reduction and confidence building measures. And again, that will be discussed in the next panel. We have worked through bilateral engagements toward reaching agreements on confidence building measures in cyberspace designed to reduce the risk of escalation due to misunderstanding or miscalculation regarding a cyber incident of national security concern emanating from the U.S. or another country's territory. This is one of the few parallels when people say, what are the parallels between the cyber world and the nuclear world? Not many, frankly, but this is one of the parallels there is. Confidence building measures form the basis of keeping escalation from happening, of building transparency, building confidence in that environment, and it's been, I think, a really rich vein of work in the cyber environment. In December, at the ministerial meeting of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, we achieved an agreement among 57 participating states for the first ever cyber CBMs for multinational security organizations. So the first time we had a multilateral agreement on that. And I will tell you that was a significant achievement. Again, it wasn't clear we'd be able to reach that consensus with all those countries, and we were, and that's a significant milestone, and we want to build upon that as well. We're also leading the development of cyber CBMs in other regional organizations, such as the ASEAN Regional Forum, ARF. We envision a future of greater stability and cooperation where all states are connected through these risk reduction measures and that they don't have the incentive to disturb stability in cyberspace in a long-term effort. And again, this is ongoing work, but it's very important work because that kind of transparency, that kind of understanding, and that kind of cooperation really builds the bridges that you need to keep things from escalating in this ever-changing environment. The second area where there's a lot of work, and it's been addressed during the day, is the work on internet governance. This is an emerging front in the struggle for openness in cyberspace. The United States and many others in the international community support the existing inclusive multi-stakeholder model of internet governance. Other states seek to establish intergovernmental oversight mechanisms for the technical management of internet resources and operations. The politics of intergovernmental control would upend the currently successful model of governance, leaving non-governmental stakeholders disenfranchised. Any mechanism involving total government control over internet policy would inevitably enshrine restrictive rules and regulations and help legitimize the kind of censorship and content control exercised by repressive regimes. The United States opposes these efforts to shift internet governance to a top-down intergovernmental model. As part of our efforts, we are working to promote more diverse representation by governments and other stakeholders at multi-stakeholder institutions, building multi-stakeholder capacity to participate in the process, and supporting efforts to further internationalize governance functions. We've also successfully opposed efforts to create a top-down, state-driven UN mechanism for internet management in venues, including in the ITU. And we look forward, as Michael said this morning, to the global multi-stakeholder meeting on the future of internet governance and the high-level panel chaired by President Ilves of Estonia that's going to be taking place, and they'll be releasing their report, the panel, and the conference will be taking place in April of this year. The third area, foundational area, is the area of promoting internet freedom. And all of these areas, as you can tell, have some overlap and are mutually reinforcing to some extent. In the past year, threats to internet freedom have grown as a look at some of the independent reports out there, like those written by Freedom House or Reporters Without Borders, clearly show. In fact, according to data from the OpenNet initiative, 960 million internet users live in countries that impose illegitimate restrictions on content. That's 47% of all internet users in the world. For this reason, it is more important than ever that the U.S. government continues to work to ensure the ability of individuals worldwide to exercise their fundamental freedoms online. This involves, one, promoting the existing consensus that international human rights obligations and commitments apply to online activity. Two, providing support for individuals facing repression online and bolstering civil society roles in internet policy-making processes. And three, encouraging companies to adopt practices and policies that respect human rights online. I'm happy to say there's, again, been some successful developments in recent years in this front. We were part of the core group of countries and others who supported in 2012 the UN Human Rights Council Resolution 20/8, which affirmed that the rights that people have offline also apply online. This resolution was adopted by consensus. It's now the clearest statement from the world's governments in support of internet freedom, and very significant because, again, there was real doubt. It may seem self-evident to many in this room that you should have the same rights online as you do offline, but not so. So, very significant statement. In addition, we were instrumental in the launch of the Freedom Online Coalition in 2011. It was launched in The Hague in the Netherlands. And this is a group of governments committed to taking concrete action in support of internet freedom. The group has organized annual conferences to discuss pressing issues. It also serves as a vehicle for coordinating efforts at international venues where there might be internet freedom implications. And the group is continuing to grow, and grow really from countries around the world. Since its launch, it's expanded now to include 21 governments from all regions of the world. And the next meeting of the Freedom Online Coalition will be convened in Tallinn, Estonia, in April as well, and we look forward to that conference as well. The fourth area is combating the serious threat posed by the explosion of cybercrime, a topic near and dear to my heart as my background was a former criminal prosecutor with the Department of Justice for many years. Cybercrime is really a metastasizing transnational scourge that has cost the global economy, by some estimates, billions of dollars and has reduced trust in the internet. Now, one of the issues is the reliability of hard numbers of how much cybercrime has cost, but by any measure, it's certainly had a major impact, and it continues to have an impact. Some states believe that the answer to the cybercrime problem is to promote a new UN treaty, which would take years to negotiate, but unlikely to result in anything of greater utility than the existing Budapest Cybercrime Convention, to which the US and 40 other countries are parties, and potentially sideline many ongoing and effective efforts to build international capacity to tackle high-tech crime. We believe that the Budapest Convention provides a strong basis for our fight against cybercrime while also protecting fundamental human rights. It identifies 3 elements needed for effective cybercrime legislation, namely, 1, strong and harmonious cybercrime laws, 2, comprehensive investigative tools for addressing high-tech crime and conducting digital forensics, and 3, effective mechanisms for both formal and informal cooperation like the GA 24/7 network, essentially 3 legs of the stool that all countries need. Diplomatically, promoting accession to the Budapest Convention or adopting its provisions in domestic law and participation in the G8's 24/7 high-tech crime network are key priorities for the U.S. We are heartened to see regionally diverse countries like Japan, Australia, the Dominican Republic, and Mauritius becoming parties to the convention in the last 2 years, with many more countries, including Senegal, Colombia, Costa Rica, Morocco, and Israel, in the process of joining. But we also recognize that many countries need help with this fight, and so we are strongly supporting capacity building efforts to enhance rights' ability to fight cybercrime and address the exponential growth in digital evidence in all criminal investigations. The State Department is working with our interagency partners at the Departments of Justice and Commerce and DHS, as well as the private sector and key international partners and institutions to eliminate cybercrime havens wherever they may exist. And as Michael Daniel and the President has said this morning, the President's speech, we're also looking to reform the process for which other governments get digital evidence from us, given that that has become such an issue. We firmly believe that the battle against transnational crime is one that we can win, and that there's a lot of good efforts ongoing, and there's a lot more we need to do. The fifth area is ensuring that nations perform their cybersecurity due diligence. And so this is different than international security. This is where we're working closely with DHS as well as the rest of the interagency to strengthen relationships with other countries as we cooperate on cybersecurity issues of mutual concern. So this includes efforts to enhance collaboration on network defense, incident management and recovery, and supporting the development of those capabilities where needed. It also involves enhancing participation in and strengthening the existing regional and global cybersecurity fora. For example, the U.S. government has provided a number of regional capacity building training to countries in Eastern and Western Africa in the last few years, and we plan to do more such trainings, regional trainings, both in Africa and in other parts of the world in the future. And I view this, and I view some of these other efforts as foundational to all our other efforts. You need to be able to give states the capability to fight cybercrime, to do cybersecurity, and these efforts really help us do that. We use our diplomatic, and I also say that one of the advantages for the developing world is they are in the position to actually do things that we can't. They are in the position as they develop their technology, as they get more bandwidth, as they develop innovative solutions like in Kenya, for instance, the M-Pesa online payment system, that they can start thinking about how you build security in from the beginning instead of as an afterthought, and I think that's important. And so it's really important that we have that partnership with them. And that also helps bring them into this larger like-minded community. We use our diplomatic engagements and other channels to emphasize the importance of good cybersecurity due diligence and our shared goals of a more secure and reliable cyberspace. And the State Department has been a big supporter of greater international CERT-to-CERT cooperation, and CERT experts are often part of our international delegations. We also use our diplomatic channels to support DHS information sharing efforts, helping to draw the attention of foreign policymakers to the need for cooperation on specific cybersecurity threats of significant concern. I'll give you an example. There were denial of service attacks, as many of you know, as all of you will probably know, against our financial institutions over the course of the last year. And of course, we reached out through our technical channels, our CERT channels, to I think over 100 countries around the world where these botnets were located. And as you know, a botnet is distributed. It can be in countries around the world. It can shift day to day, hour to hour in terms of the concentration of those bots. So it's common to reach out through those technical channels, but we married it with something that is, before I came to the State Department, I thought these were always bad things, a démarche. A démarche is when you go to another government and you ask them to do something. You can have a positive démarche, and this is a positive démarche where we went to many countries, key countries, and we said, look, we really think this is important. We really need your help. We really want you to cooperate with us. We want to build this norm of greater cooperation among countries. And of course, we're willing to reciprocate, too, if you have a similar problem. And we married that with the technical outreach. So it was clear this was not just a technical issue, but also a political issue and an issue that we thought was important. And that really helped our collaboration. The final area is states' work to promote the internet and cyberspace more generally as an engine of economic growth. The internet has proven to be a major catalyst for economic development around the world, and the State Department is supporting efforts to bridge the digital divide so that an open, interoperable, secure, and reliable internet can be an engine for growth even in the poorest regions of the world. The State Department has provided support both through its diplomatic efforts and its support for the Alliance for Affordable Internet, a coordinated public-private civil society voice advocating policy and regulatory best practices for expanding affordable access to the internet. Moreover, our USAID has taken the lead in providing technical assistance and capacity building through its Global Broadband Innovation Program and through its mobile solutions team in the Global Developments Lab. So all of these efforts, again, are foundational to our other efforts. We carry out all these policies through, this actually goes to one of the questions that came up before, through a number of different ways, but through engagement with other countries, through engagement in regional institutions, through engagement in multinational institutions, for engagements with civil society and with business. There's a multitude of ways that I think we need to engage and continue to work these issues. And there's been great regional solutions in the OAS, for instance, on cybersecurity. I talked about OSCE, and I talked about others where there's been specific good progress that can be modeled other places in the world. And when we do our all-of-government dialogues with a number of other countries, and that's growing every year in terms of the number of dialogues we're doing, we do these as whole-of-government dialogues. We bring all the different players to the table, and they bring all the different players from their side of the table. And that really significantly advances this discussion so that it's not stovepipe in one part of a government, but it's really the broader discussion where we're trying to make progress in this whole range of issues. So as I look back on the last 3 busy and at times challenging years, I feel confident that the U.S. government is promoting the right vision for the future of cyber issues, one that like-minded, again, broad term, like-minded countries around the world agree with, and one that will make the benefits of cyberspace, as we in the U.S. are fortunate enough to enjoy them right now, available to more and more people of the world. As we tackle the many opportunities that lie ahead, our commitment to the principles laid out in the international strategy is constant. The other constant is also articulated in the international strategy, which notes that, quote, international collaboration is more than a best practice, it is a first principle, unquote. And that's certainly the key to all of our efforts, all of the U.S. government efforts, and even with the challenges ahead, there are real opportunities. And I think the the maturity of the subject has grown from year to year. People are taking it much more seriously now than I think they ever have, and the stakes are certainly higher, so it's important for us to do this. So with that, I'll stop, and I will open it to questions, I guess.
Hello, sir. Jason Rivera. I'm a student here at Georgetown. One of the major themes today has been a multi-stakeholder model, and as you mentioned, sir, also engaging with other like-minded governments throughout the world. I'm wondering, what is the State Department strategy or the U.S. government strategy as a whole for engaging those governments who may not be like-minded, but also hold a major stake within internet governance?
Look, I think you can't afford not to engage many governments, and you know, for some of the governments we're engaging do not agree with us on that whole suite of issues I laid out. And so you can make progress with some of those issues. You can make progress, for instance, with some governments in building better transparency and confidence building measures, even if you disagree on some of these core other concepts. And you need to have that level of engagement, because you're never going to make progress if you don't have that level of engagement. But that's also, you know, the way we've talked about norms in the international community from time immemorial is you try to build a consensus, and a larger and larger consensus, and if people are outside that consensus, and I'll take the example of money laundering back long ago, you build a consensus around a particular norm, and if you're outside the consensus, you get pressure to join that consensus. So I think we have to look at that in the long term, recognizing there are some countries who have a fundamentally different view, for instance, in terms of stability and internet freedom, and we're not going to change that overnight. But that doesn't mean we can't reach out to the governments, and there's a lot of them who are on the fence, who understand, who are worried about stability, but they're also worried about economic development, and they're worried about social development. And we have to make the business case for them. And there's been, I think, some good activity there. I think we need to do more.
Great, thank you.
Hey, Chris, Randy Fort. A comment that Mike Hayden made in the previous session about the future possible organization of cyber statecraft and U.S. government, and specifically strengthening our approaches by adding to our capability. For example, establishing a cyber bureau at the State Department rather than just having you and your small, relatively small team doing what you're doing and trying to cover so many bases. So given that we have this international kind of focus, I just wonder, could you speculate a little bit? We've had, obviously now with Cyber Command, the DoD's kind of added specific gravity and mass to their activities. Is it time for the State Department to have a cyber bureau to take on some of these growing responsibilities?
So let me answer it this way. First of all, we've grown from 4 people to now 14, which is good. And it's not just our office. We work with people throughout the State Department and leverage those capabilities. And that's, in fact, the way we're set up in the Secretary's office, to be able to work with people in our Human Rights Bureau, people in our Economic Bureau who spend a lot of time on internet governance issues and ITU issues, folks in our INL, our International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Bureau, people in our political military and arms control and verification bureaus, and each of the regional bureaus. And State Department has regional bureaus for different regions of the world. What we've focused on doing, and what I think is the most critically important thing to do, and particularly in the short run, is to mainstream this issue as a foreign policy issue throughout the building, so that you don't have to externally say this is an important issue, that people organically understand that's an important issue. Now, if you could organize many different ways, but if you organize something that is a separate bureau, you're not mainstreaming the issue, you're cabining the issue. And this is not an issue, unlike some issues, that is easily cabined. It's so cross-cutting, it's so involved in all these major policy issues, that I think it's important to make sure that people, policymakers, not just throughout the department, but throughout the government, understand what their role is and why this is important, and really own that issue. And that's what we've been working toward.
Hi, Chris. Mike Best. As we all know, the State Department maintains a list of foreign terrorist organizations and groups. Do you think that there would be any benefit to maintaining a separate list for cyber terrorist groups, or one that might even include large-scale cyber criminal groups, such as RBN, which aids cyber terrorism directly and indirectly, sometimes with help from contacts within the Russian government? I don't want to name names.
So without commenting on that part of your question, I just say, look, I mean, I think we're working closely with DHS and Treasury and other agencies in terms of how we address these different issues. I don't want to comment on specific tools that are out there, but I think we're really looking at all the tools. We, and not just we, but the interagency and the White House, are looking at all the tools to more effectively combat both cybercrime and I don't like the term cyber terrorists. It doesn't mean anything to me because it's such a vague term and people use it in different ways. So cybercrime and other threats. And so we're looking at all the tools that are out there.
All right, thank you.
Hello, I'm Don Abbasi. I'm with the National Guard Bureau. I'm just curious if the Army National Guard State Partnership Program is a tool that you use in your cyber engagements.
You know, it's one we're actually reaching out to. I was in Estonia recently, and for instance, the state of Maryland's National Guard has a partnership with Estonia that's been very productive. And I've heard this from the Estonian president, Thomas Ilves. I've heard it from other people in the Estonian government. So that's an interesting thing to look at. I'm not sure all the National Guards are doing that as effectively as that relationship is out there, but it's something we definitely want to explore and see what's out there and how we can leverage that. And I'd be happy to talk to you about that afterwards. Okay, I think that was the last question, I'm told. So, okay, great. Thanks.